Hope everybody is having a good week. Despite obviously the Cardinals today, not a huge Arizona Cardinals fan, but obviously I recognize that most of y'all are. So tough day of sports. But like I said, there are a lot of things to be happy about coming off of this game, and we'll definitely touch on them. Okay, looks like we can go ahead and get started. One thing I definitely want to touch on, just kind of right off the bat, is Aiton, because Aiton has been such a heavy topic of discussion for our Suns. So I definitely think it's important that we give him his due whenever it actually comes down to the impact that he had on these last two games. Man, we had to get playoff P and not pandemic P. Glad they got back in it. Yeah, no, it was really tough seeing Paul George, of all people, going off. It's one thing whenever Jamal Murray kills us, but whenever you see what Paul George is capable of in the playoffs, and then he shows up for 39 easy points against us tonight, it is definitely tough to. It hurts, man. You definitely hate to see it. But yeah, no. So for the first half with Aiton, I think he was the one guy who was playing some solid defense. I think McHale and Jay both did a fine enough job with the matchups they had. But one of the things that I really saw is as soon as Aiton came off the floor, that 3-point shooting began to morph into more intensive drives at the basket. And when Aiton was not on the floor, the Clippers were taking full advantage of that, which you definitely do not want to see. And defensively as a whole in the first half, I mean, as I mentioned in my takeaway, it is hard to place such a significant blame on our defense because, I mean, they were hitting some great shots, but there were definitely some massive defensive lapses. I definitely think that early on we were over helping on the driving, which was leading to a lot of open, just wide fucking open 3-point shots from Batum and Kennard, which really got their offense going. And then I think we kind of over adjusted with Aiton off the floor, which opened up the driving lanes for PG and Reggie Jackson, as well as opening up the floor for Zubac. So it definitely was a tough act from the Suns on defense in the first half. But I think on the second half, it really came together. Obviously, it helps that PG wasn't hitting nearly as many fadeaway threes or heavily contested mid-range pull-ups. But I definitely think that we were sticking more to individual defenders rather than like rotating early. I think that we were allowing more penetration, and Aiton did a fantastic job in the second half on the penetration, and with Aiton stepping up early on those rotations or on the help defense off of the penetrations, it was really allowing McHale and Jay and D-Book to stay home on shooters, which allowed for a lot more contesting, which was definitely a significant plus. I think that our offense, it's an enigma. It really is. I mean, we've seen what we can do against a team like the Pelicans, where the ball movement is crisp. There's high levels of involvement from everybody on the team. The ball is not sticking with any one player. But there are definitely instances like tonight where guys like Cam Johnson in the first half were really killing ball movement, and it definitely was affecting us, especially at the end of the second quarter there whenever we were going on the run. We definitely had ample opportunity to make it a 15-ish point game instead of a 20-point game going into half. I also think that just overall, I don't think our bench underperformed as individuals outside of Cam Johnson in the first half. However, that bench unit definitely was not nearly as effective as it is or as it has been against other teams. Obviously, you can't expect the bench to carry the weight of the offense and the defense. for significant periods of time. But we have been able to rely on them in these last 6 games outside of the first Kings game, and tonight we just weren't able to rely on our bench to create open shots as well as get defensive stops. However, like I said, I do think Dario had a very, very solid night. I think Javon did his role well, and I love what I'm seeing out of Campaign. Cam Johnson, as I mentioned in my main takeaways, had a fucking brutal first half. Like, I don't want to pull any punches here. I mean, I like to think that I'm try to criticize the players when I see something bad, and I mean, I really do believe it was his worst half as a Phoenix Suns. However, he really turned around in the second half. He wasn't the ball stopper. I like the increase of defensive intensity. There were 1 or 2 opportunities where he helped cut off a Batum drive. So I like what I saw out of him. I liked more what I saw out of him on defense in the second half. His rebounding continues to be a bit of an issue. I definitely think it's Cam Johnson's weakest point, especially coming from the fact that he's a 6'9" athletic dude. But he did better in the second half. I definitely saw him putting a body on a good handful of people. But yeah, it was really exciting to see us bounce back in that second half. I mean, I mentioned this in my main takeaways, but 2 to 3 years ago, that was a game that we lose by 50. That was a game that we lose by 40, that we get blown out of, and by the beginning of the fourth quarter, it's scrub time, it's bench time. And tonight we fought back hard, and you have to admire the intensity and the tenacity out of our starting lineup. It definitely helps that we had some very solid individual performances from our starters, including D-Book, Ayton. I think Jay played very, very solid tonight. Mikhail did what Mikhail does on defense, and then I liked what I saw out of CP3 tonight. But I think tonight was both a reminder to temper expectations for Suns fans, as well as something to be very excited about. You know, I think that very few teams, if you put every single NBA team into the exact situation that the Suns were in the middle of the second quarter, I think there's maybe 4 or 5 teams that do as well as we did. They put our head down and really made this a game, especially in the late third and early fourth quarter. I think that's a huge sign for us, and I think that there is a lot of optimism to take away from that. However, I did want to come into this post-game analysis to remind everybody, HuntStar05, thank you for the follow. I greatly appreciate it. I did want to come into this post-game analysis tonight to remind all of y'all on our Suns that last year, at this exact same time of the year, relative to the season, we were 5-2. We did start off last season 5-2, and we are now 5-2. And I think that we are obviously a much better team than we were last year. I'm not saying anything other than that. You're the Mikhail jail guy on Reddit. LOL. I absolutely love those. I definitely want to see a compilation of all of those one day, because I mean, you're having to put in some work this season, that's for sure. But I definitely want to emphasize the fact that this is early in the season. We are not through 10 games of the season. I mean, the Hawks are 4-2, 5-2 as well. The Knicks are playing well. The Magic without Jonathan Isaac are playing well. We do need to contextualize that it is just 7 games into the season. With that being said, I do think that there has been a lot to take away optimistically, especially our ball movement and the fact that we're playing great defense. I mean, whether it's no matter the team that we're playing, no matter the offensive threats that we're playing, we are getting very solid contests, and that's something that will not change without barring any kind of significant injury, of course. But I do again, kind of want to temper some expectations coming off of this loss. But again, I do absolutely, without a doubt, believe that we are a playoff team based off of what I've seen out of the Suns so far this year. I mean, we've looked very, very good against the Jazz, Pelicans, and even against the Nuggets. And then in the second half tonight, I mean, we looked like a very legitimate NBA playoff team. However, again, we're a young team. We're a high shooting team, a high volume of shooting team, and that can lead to kind of some streakiness. And so I definitely don't want anybody, any Suns fans, anybody on our Suns, to hit the panic button if a few games don't go our way. I think tonight showed me that there will definitely be a handful of games that just don't go our way tonight. And that's okay. And even the best teams in the NBA have games that don't go their way. I'm so proud of the way they came back, first time pulling up here. Thank you for checking out the stream. I genuinely appreciate that. Even though it was a loss, I think it was a very good sign. I definitely agree in terms of the grand scheme of what we can expect out of this team. I definitely think there were a lot of positives to take away. I mean, in my opinion, tonight was D-Book's best game. He still had a handful of sloppy turnovers, but it was definitely good to see him return to form, to a familiar form, to Suns fans. I mean, I don't think he's played horrible this year, but he has obviously not played at D-Book standards. It was a second game in a row where Ayton has played fantastic. We continue to see what Chris Paul can do in terms of creating offense and the ball movement for this team. I do think there are a lot of positives to take away. However, again, I definitely want us, just based off of what I've seen from the past 3 or 4 days from our Suns, this is definitely a good reminder that we are only 7 games into the season. If anything, like you said, this is definitely not the 2017-2018 Suns. No, I completely agree without a doubt. And I don't want to get everybody down after this game. What we saw was a plus, an overall plus. The Clippers are a fantastic team. Do not get me wrong. However, we cannot ignore that first half. Thank you for the follow. I greatly appreciate that. The way they fought back was nice. If they weren't a stronger playoff caliber team, they would have folded instead of fighting back to a one-possession game. I completely agree. And like I said, I think there's only maybe a handful of teams that would have been able to fight back within that situation. I mean, we saw the Clippers without Kawhi not fight back against the Mavs just a week or two ago. So I definitely agree. And even I think great teams in the NBA today might not be able to fight back to the degree in which we did. So that is a big positive takeaway. That missed charge goal at the end when Batum hit 3 hurt. Yeah, I agree, but that's one of those that I definitely do not expect the Suns to get at this point in time, especially not against the Clippers. They also went supernova in the first quarter. I also agree, but I think that I mentioned this in my post or in the game thread. Thank you for the follow. I greatly appreciate that. I mentioned this in the game thread about how at one point late in the first, early in the second quarter, they were shooting like 73% from 3. And I think that with how hot they were shooting, even if we were getting good contests on them, they still would have been shooting 50+% from 3. But I definitely think there was an element in that first quarter where we just weren't contesting shots at a high level. I mean, Kennard had back-to-back wide-open corner threes. Batum had a handful of open threes. Even Paul George had a handful of open threes, which could have contributed to him getting hot early. However, we did fight back, and we did really lock in on defense, especially in that late second quarter and all the way throughout the second half. So there is a lot to take away from this. If it was the Mavs and Luka coming back from that deficit, I guarantee it's all over ESPN. I definitely think that it's noteworthy, and we definitely deserve some credit for it. But at the end of the day, we did lose, and I definitely think that that tempers the conversation topic of it, even if it was Luka and the Mavs, who ESPN fucking sucks off. Thoughts on CP3 to guard PG? It's a weird thing where the Clippers like to run Paul George at shooting guard, and he was kind of cooking D-Book for a little bit there. I wasn't in love with the matchup. However, I don't hate it. I think we need to do more to help him, especially whenever PG catches it in that 14 to 15 foot range. Back to the basket, that is where PG is just a fucking threat, and he had a short guy, a 6 foot guard on him. However, that being said, there's no 6 foot guard I'd rather have on PG than Chris Paul. I mean, Chris Paul's post defense continues to not only shock me, but just like utterly impress me. Like, there is no way you can find me a 6 foot guard in NBA history who's a better post defender than Chris Paul. Like, you can't find it. It is shocking. I legitimately think he's like 8 of 11 or 9 of 11 at this point on defensive stops on post players that are bigger than him. So I do like. I do think that CP3 was a better matchup against PG than D-Book, especially when D-Book was getting super involved on the offense. However, I obviously don't love the matchup, and I would almost prefer us to have D-Book rather than guarding their point guard. I would be perfectly fine against a Clippers team who at one point was running Batum on the floor at power forward. I wouldn't mind D-Book guarding Batum. Batum's not a super fast guy, and D-Book's a big body shooting guard. And then have Mikal on PG and Jay on Kawhi. At one point, Monty did adjust and moved Jay onto Kawhi. I love that move. I definitely think that although Mikal is our best perimeter defense and their defender, and there is no argument to that, I do think that Mikal does struggle against highly physical, body-to-body, back-to-the-basket kind of players. I mean, he struggled in the Nuggets game against Paul Millsap for a little bit before we switched Jay onto him. And Jay did a solid job against Zion. So with those heavily physical, run-through-you kind of players, I definitely would like to see Jay Crowder get some more minutes on it. And, I mean, PG is a finesse player. He's a fantastic dribbler. He loves those little step backs, big hair cutter. Thank you for the follow. I greatly appreciate it. But like I said, PG is kind of more of a finesse player, a perimeter dribbling. I mean, he dribbles like a guard. And I think that is Mikal's defensive specialty. So I definitely would have liked to see more Mikal minutes on PG. We saw it for a little bit. But for a significant amount of time there, Mikal was on Kawhi. I understand it. Kawhi is their best offensive player in a vacuum. But especially once PG got hot, I definitely would have liked to see Mikal switched on to PG earlier, and then D-Book guarding the Nicholas Batums of the Clippers. What's your thoughts on the Booker PG scuffle? I think Paul George is I'm trying to... how can I say this without just being outright fucking disrespectful to Paul George? I think Paul George is a continuous hold me back player. I think he continually shows the fact that he's about that talk but not about that life. I think that there are a lot of instances where PG is having a dog shit game and is dead fucking quiet. However, whenever he hits a few shots, he begins to chirp, and I think that's bitch shit. I mean, I understand that that PG is a legitimate, very good basketball player. I just don't fuck with the only talking when you are playing well or your team is up. I mean, he was real fucking quiet when they were getting stomped out by the Nuggets in the fourth quarter. So for him to be chirping against the Suns now, that's some weak shit, dog. That's just some weak shit, in my opinion. What adjustments do we make after this game, if any at all? I definitely will be touching on Cam Johnson a little bit more, but one of the things I would like to see from the Cam and Mikal is more ball movement. I think at times they have a tendency to let the ball stick. I don't think they're continual ball stoppers, perennial ball stoppers by any means. But I do think that every once in a while that ball-stopping monster shows its head, and I think with Cam Johnson in the first half, it really, really showed its head, and I think it really killed some of the offensive momentum that we had in the first half. Other adjustments is I think that every single game that we've come into, we almost we don't early rotate early on in the game, and then once teams start knocking down threes, we begin those early rotations to help more on the three-point shot and allow more penetration. And I would be more in on starting off the game with those early rotations and allowing Ayton to relying on Ayton in the post on those penetrations early on, rather than just after a team has made a handful of threes. I think we saw it against the Nuggets. I mean, we started off with early rotations at the beginning of the Mavs game and at the beginning of the second Kings game. I wasn't able to catch the first few minutes of the Jazz game. However, against the Nuggets, we weren't early rotating. We were more worried about that early penetration, and I do think that kind of negatively affected us in the first quarter against the Nuggets, and I think tonight it really fucking hurt us. Because, I mean, they got hot from three, and it's one of those things where when you have good three-point shooting players like a Luke Kennard, like a Paul George, if they see 2 to 3 shots go in, it's going to be even harder to stop them the rest of the game. So I would like to see the early rotations on defense start at the very beginning of the game. Rely on Ayton to stop the penetrations from the get-go. But other than that, I wouldn't say there were any significant adjustments. I definitely think at times our ball movement continues to break down. However, I don't know if that's necessarily an adjustment we need to make, or if the 0.5 offense is just not the best whenever it's time for CP3 or D-Book to just go get a bucket. Whenever it comes to that, just go get a bucket moments, our ball movement can stall, and if those two guys begin to kick it out early, I think that the lack of ball movement can definitely negatively affect the Jay Crowders, the McHales, the Cam Johnsons of the team. So I would like to see more of that, especially in those late game scenarios. But those are all minor adjustments. I don't think there's any significant major adjustment to come out of this game with. Being good at basketball doesn't mean he isn't a bitch boy. You said it. I wouldn't disagree. Let's just say I don't want PG representing the NBA against Jake Paul. Oh, God, that's a horrifying thought on both ends. I wonder if those defensive rotations just naturally improve with more time together and better communications. I mean, absolutely. And I do think there's an element of that where when the game first starts off, you might be slow on your rotations, and then after a few buckets, you remember, oh, I need to rotate as the ball is in the air rather than after the ball has hit the floor on penetration attempts. But, you know, I definitely think that there are minor tweaks here and there that could be made to improve both our ball movement and defensive rotations. So pumped for the season, the Suns this season. I mean, I completely agree. It definitely, even though we lost tonight, there is still a lot to be excited about. And I do think that we are going to be a very good playoff team. I don't think we'll be an easy first round out for whoever draws us in the first round. However, it is a long season. 72 games is a very long season, and we need to be ready for some losses as well as some great wins. Even the best playoff teams have some bad losses throughout the season. How about Ayton this game? He finally played exactly how I picture him playing, to his potential. I'm going to read some more comments, then I'll get to Ayton. Do not worry. I still see more potential if he can start dribbling better and get the spin euro and doing Giannis things. The sky is the limit. I am not in love with I've never been in love with the Ayton to Giannis comparisons. I don't think Ayton, or really any big man throughout NBA history, other than maybe Hakeem, is nearly as coordinated as Giannis. And I think Giannis's penetration skills, as well as his ball handling, is significantly underrated. And I don't think Ayton's anywhere close to the ball handler that Giannis is. So I think that kind of expectation is a little bit high. I definitely see Ayton more as a back-to-the-basket, a dominant big man of the old era. And I think that could be extremely helpful and utilized heavily within a modern-day offense. I mean, we saw it tonight, and we saw it against the Nuggets 2 nights ago. Oh gosh, if DA can move and play like Giannis, it's game over. I mean, that definitely would be game over, but I'd for sure temper your expectations in that regard. I love his defense this season, though. I absolutely do as well. I think that tonight he wasn't as good as against the Nuggets on defense. However, I think the Nuggets game was his best game defensively. I think he was quite easily our best player against the Nuggets. However, this game, I definitely would say the best player award goes to D Book. However, I think Ayton was definitely the second most important player on the Suns tonight. I think that what he brings on the defensive end allows for those early rotations, that allows our 3-point contests to be consistently very solid. But yeah, the new crop is showing that a 7-footer doesn't mean you can't dribble and make moves. I think Ayton has a shitload of moves, but I think those moves are best utilized back to the basket rather than running full speed down the paint like Giannis. I don't think Ayton has the coordination or dribbling to be able to necessarily become the Giannis-esque player. Totally agree. We definitely aren't lacking in shooters. We just need him to play within himself, and he can really shine and help everyone else excel too. I could not agree more. I mean, we consistently continue to see what Ayton contributes to the ball movement. I mean, the best example for that tonight was in the fourth quarter, or maybe it was late in the third quarter, where Jay feeds Ayton. He catches it. The back guy comes to help. He takes a step in. That back guy steps up one more step to contest Ayton, and Ayton feeds it into the opposite corner to McHale for the wide open three. I think that one of Ayton's most underrated skills, if not most underrated skill, is his passing vision. I don't think he's necessarily the best fundamental passer. He's not a Jokic or even like a, Blake Griffin. But I do think that his passing vision is absolutely elite. I think that his passing vision allows him to effectively pass out of doubles, which we saw in the Kings game, as well as he's not somebody who's the ball's going to stick with. He's not going to dribble 8-9 times and go nowhere with it. Which is not something that you continually see or consistently see out of most big men in the league. Although we may want to see more aggressiveness out of Ayton, Ayton definitely has that LaMarcus Aldridge, Tim Duncan in him, where he is not a ball stopper. He's going to continue the movement of the offense. And I think that's incredibly important as a low post big man in the space and pace era. D-Book was the player of the game tonight. Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, what he did in the third and fourth quarter was just vintage D-Book, and I love to see him turn it on like that. I had no doubt that he was going to be able to turn it on like that, but it's been missing in moments so far this season, and tonight was just really a classic throwback D-Book game. YouTube TV got rid of FSA, so I can't watch the games anymore. That is incredibly unfortunate, and I highly, highly recommend looking up NBA streams. Okay, you're right. Ayton does have some nice low post moves. I mean, that's Ayton's bread and butter. I talk about this on a clip on my Twitch channel if you want to check it out later, where I just showed some Ayton highlights and then talked about Hakeem, because Hakeem's probably my favorite NBA player of all time. But Ayton really has everything that you need out of a low post scorer. His feet work is fantastic. It's an incredibly underrated thing, and I wish he'd get into his bag more with his ability to utilize feet work in the post, in the low post. I think that he has a fantastic jump hook over both shoulders. He's really got a really nice low shoulder post fade. I think his drop step is fucking dominant. I think also 5th or 6th, I definitely would agree on the let's see the Suns will finish at. I just saw that. I think that his drop step is absolutely elite, and I think when he catches the ball 5 feet from the basket, facing the basket, it's just one of those things of good luck. He has high arc on his shot for just a little shove, for his little 5-foot shoves that he does, which make it even harder to block outside of his insane height and length. So I definitely think Ayton is best utilized as a back-to-the-basket dominant low-post big man. I mean, we've seen it with Joel Embiid at points. Even the Nuggets will occasionally do it with Jokic. But I do think Ayton is a throwback to the older era of back-to-the-basket big man, even though he does He does have an extreme ability to pass out of the high post. I think he can knock down those jumpers. I would like to continue to see him extend his three-point range. However, I don't want him to be a part of what I call the Brett Brown offense, which I think one of the main reasons why Joel Embiid had such a down year last year was because if you watch 76ers games, they would just have Joel Embiid stand at the top of the three-point line, and the ball movement would go through him, and he would take a lot of threes, and he would just stand on the perimeter. And I fucking hate that. When you have a dominant low post scorer who has a high points of possession every single time they touch the ball within 8 feet of the basket, they need to be 8 feet from the fucking basket. And I'm all for pick and rolls. I'm all for all of that. But I really do think Ayton will be a dominant low post scorer for us, and I continue to see that. There are absolutely flashes of that, and there were quite a few flashes of that, not only in the Nuggets game, but this game as well. He rifled a really nice pass to Bridges in the corner tonight. Yep, I completely agree. I'm not a fan of Embiid at all taking a lot of threes. I absolutely fucking hate it, especially as an Embiid fan. It seems like he wants to too often. Yeah, and I think that he wants to so often, especially in part because of the effects of the offense that Brett Brown ran with him. Yeah, feed the ball inside makes no sense to have him shoot the three, and I'm okay with him hitting the occasional pick and pop. I think that being able to pop out of pick and rolls does open up a significant amount of rolling threat. However, when it comes to him in that Igor offense just standing back to the basket at the three-point line or even facing up at the three-point line and just moving the ball around the perimeter, I fucking hate that, and it's an absolute waste of his talent. So I am not a fan of that at all. DeAndre has been playing too much 2K where they always do that crap with big men. Now, I completely agree. And whenever I talk about DeAndre Ayton, I always talk about how he's LaMarcus Aldridge in David Robinson's body. He definitely has those LaMarcus Aldridge tendencies, that mid-range love, and that's fine. But I would like to see him be more aggressive at the basket. And there was a lot of that tonight. I mentioned this in my main takeaways. But maybe my favorite stretch throughout the entire game was about a 6 or 7 possession stretch where Ayton got fouled going up 3 different times. There were 3 different possessions where Ayton got to the line in a span of about 7 possessions. And I fucking love to see that. Not fading away from the contact, not trying to go up over the contact, but going through the contact. And we need to continue to see that from him. He's a good free throw shooter for a big man, and I think for him to reach his full potential, he needs to continue to do those fadeaways and those jump hooks over the contact, but occasionally put a body into the contact. And he did that tonight, and I really, really fucking loved to see that. Okay, now that we've kind of just talked about the game for a little bit, I am going to go player by player for the Suns and just kind of touch on anything that I haven't touched on tonight. D-Book with 25, 5, and 8, 7 of 13 shooting, 1 of 3. The thing that really stands out to me for his stat line is 10 of 12 from the free throw line. I love the fact that he continues to be aggressive. There are always instances in which he doesn't get the foul calls that he deserves. However, I definitely love the fact that he just continues to put his head down. And in the third quarter, those buckets that he was giving us were so important to making this a close game. I love what I saw at D-Book. I think this was absolutely his best performance of the year, and I hope there's more of this to come in following games. I think Mikal Bridges, 7, 8, and 2, 1 of 7 shooting, 1 of 5 from 3. I think the stat line obviously was not there for Mikal tonight, but it's hard to complain. It's one of those things where even despite the fact that he shot 1 of 7, I don't think his ball stopping was incredibly significant at all. I like to see him continuing to attack the basket. I think that he continued to open up ball movement for the team even when his shot wasn't falling. Played some good defense, as good as defense as you can ask from him. but obviously had a down game tonight, and I hope he bounces back strong. I have said before that to win games, we're going to need two of the three of Jay, Mikhail, and Cam to show up. And tonight, I wouldn't say Mikhail was a no-show, but I would say that he didn't play up to his standards that I believe we can expect out of him. However, again, I wouldn't necessarily call it a bad or horrible game out of Mikhail tonight. Moving on from there, I've talked about Ayton. I think this was a fantastic game for him. It's hard to call it his best game of the year just because I think he was so fucking dominant on defense against the Nuggets. But having back-to-back games against the Nuggets and against the Clippers, I love what I'm seeing, and I hope that we can get both the defensive intensity and the offensive aggressiveness that we've gotten these last two games. If we're able to do that, we're going to win a shitload of games this year. Moving on, Chris Paul. I think Chris Paul was really, really solid tonight. 15, 9, 6, 6 of 12 shooting, 1 of 3 from 3. I think that he continues to be a fantastic option on defense, especially against the opponent's best guards. In this situation, it was Paul George. However, he obviously is not going to be guarding those guys all game long, and we can't expect him to at age 36. I love what he continues to do for the offense. When Chris Paul is really focused on getting the other guys touches, the other guys are going to fucking get touches. I think that we have great ball movement at times when Chris Paul is off the floor, but the moments where we have those flashes of that 2014 Spurs, the beautiful game, is when Chris Paul's on the floor, and we saw moments of it tonight. I definitely would like to see full games of it, like we did against the Pelicans. But tonight, I think Chris Paul played very, very well. Jay Crowder, 2 of 6 from the floor, 2 of 6 from 3, 6, 2, and 2. I think Jay played really solid today. In fact, I would probably say that he played the best out of Mikhail, Cam, and himself. I don't think he played great tonight. I really don't think really any of the three showed up to the level at which we can expect them to. However, Jay did play some fantastic defense. I really, really like what I'm seeing out of him on defense. He is absolutely somebody that we can throw on the best forward of the opposing team, especially whenever it's a big body guy. Like a Kawhi, like a Zion, like a Giannis, like a Siakam, somebody who just plays with an extreme level of physicality. That's something that's not going to affect Jay Crowder, and I think he did a really, really solid job, especially when guarding Kawhi tonight. Kawhi shot 4 of 21. Am I reading that right? 4 of 21 tonight. Jesus. That sounds just off, but Jay really, really played some great D. I think that he continues, even if the rebounding numbers aren't very high, he continues to be extremely effective in boxing out. I think he is probably the best on the team at boxing out, which allows Aiden not only to be one of the best natural rebounders in the league, but to absolutely dominate the glass, which I think is incredibly, incredibly important. And one thing that I'm really liking out of Jay is his connection with DeAndre Ayton. I think he had 2 or 3 no-look passes to Ayton tonight. And one thing that I've seen out of DeAndre Ayton is he opens up opportunities for forwards that can get into the paint and pass well. And I think that Jay Crowder could absolutely develop a legitimate connection with DeAndre Ayton. Like I said, we're already beginning to see it, and we saw elements of it in the first half tonight. One of the reasons I'm so confident in this is if we flash back to DeAndre Ayton's rookie year, I think that the one guy who probably got the ball to DeAndre Ayton the best was Josh Jackson. I think D-Book obviously fed him a lot, but in terms of just the pocket passes, driving hard to the lane, and then feeding the big men when the opposing center steps over to help on the penetration, I think that that's an incredibly important thing for our wings. And I do think that we're beginning to see the establishment of a Jay to Ayton connection, and I can't wait to see how that progresses throughout the rest of the season. With Houston being a mess of an organization, I wonder how nice the Suns organization looks like to PJ Tucker and vice versa. Would he be an amazing pickup? I love PJ. I love what he did for that 2013-14 Suns team. I'll always have love for him because of that. I think he is a fantastic, fantastic player. But I do think we have to also realize he's going to want an extension or a new contract soon. And I believe he's 34, 35 years old. And he's going to want his money, and he deserves his money. But right now we are forward heavy. He's not going to be getting center minutes for us, or God, I hope not. But I just, with Jay, Cam, and McHale, I don't know if PJ Tucker would be our best acquisition we could make. Obviously, he would make this team better in a number of ways, especially post defense and rebounding. However, again, I just don't know if that's the best acquisition that we could make for the money. However, I would love if PJ retired with the Suns. I'm all for that. Moving on from Jay Crowder. Cam Johnson tonight, he finished with 8 points, 3 rebounds, 1 assist, 3 of 9 shooting, 2 of 8 from 3. I mentioned this in my main takeaways. I'm going to do my absolute best not to be too tough on him because I do think he's incredibly important to this team, and I've loved what I've seen out of him so far this year. But it was absolutely, in my opinion, his worst half in a Phoenix Suns jersey, that first half. I think he was not only a big part of the Clippers going on a run, but I think he was a big part in our stalling offense. I think that when he missed 5 consecutive threes in the first half. He missed 3 absolutely wide open threes, and during that stretch was whenever Paul George was just torching hot, and the lead was really beginning to grow. We really needed him to knock down one of those threes, but after missing 3 wide open threes, no contests, wide open threes, he then continued on and shot back-to-back consecutive heavily contested threes while the Clippers were on the middle of a run, and I think that fucking killed us. I think that it was horrible for our ball movement. I think that after he jacked that second 3, our ball movement kind of stalled a little bit, and we eventually turned it around and went on that run at the end of the second quarter. But Cam he wasn't driving nearly enough in the second quarter, especially. He drove a little bit in the first quarter, but I thought that he was a ball stopper. I think he potentially killed some of our momentum. And then on defense, there were several plays where the one that immediately sticks out in mind is on a pick and roll out of the corner with Luke Kennard, and Luke Kennard just beat him off the dribble. And it's fucking Luke Kennard, man. Like, come on. That's just like a defensive effort thing. And not saying Luke Kennard's a bad player. He in no ways is a bad player, but he could have absolutely gotten a better contest on Luke Kennard than he did. There were several instances where he rotated late rather than early onto shooters, and that left Luke Kennard wide open in 3 in the corner for 3, and once it left Nick Batum wide open. I thought it was truly an atrocious first half, and I do think it is worth pointing that out. However, in the second half, I do think that he turned it around. I think that once he saw that 3-point shot go in the second half, it really just improved his energy on the court as well as almost his aggressiveness. It's like he was missing, and he wanted to make one before he had the confidence to fully attack. And then once one went in the second half, he really began attacking the Clippers defense, and I love to see it. I love that he came out in the second half even before he made those shots and really turned up his defensive intensity up. He was contesting more shots in his first few minutes in the second half, which I absolutely love to see. And I wouldn't say he was horrible this game. In fact, I would say that he was no worse than a McHale or a Jay overall. However, because he did have a very solid second half. I think he was incredibly important in that stretch that we had in the third. He had 2 3-pointers, but they're absolutely we needed to at least address that first half. It was an ugly first half, and I think he'll bounce back. He's a very good player, and I expect him to continue to shoot. I don't expect this to affect his confidence at all. However, I would like to say that if the shot's not falling, Cam, I would like to see you attack the basket. After that second missed open three, when you got the third one, attack the rim. You can do it at a high level. You're an athletic 6'9" guy. Get to the bucket, draw a foul. We saw you draw a foul against some great defenders early on in the year. It still is early on in the year, but it's kind of like what EJ was talking about on the broadcast tonight. Is when that shot's not falling, sometimes you just need to go get a layup. Sometimes you just need to get to the free throw line and see the ball go in. He ended up getting that shot to go in the second half, and I think it was incredibly important. So I wouldn't say he had a horrible game, but I definitely wouldn't call it a good game. Dario Saric, I fucking love the man. What a goddamn significant improvement over Damian Jones. I think that Dario Saric is... it's going to be a nice little battle between Cam and Dario for our sixth man. Dario is incredibly important. I would like to see him get more minutes next to Ayton, especially in games in which we're struggling on the rebounds. However, I understand why against the Clippers we might not have necessarily seen that, as they do like to run the Kawhi or Batum power forward lineups. So Dario's obviously going to primarily be at that center position. I think Dario, did I just miss all his good games last year, or did he become a new ball player this year? Dario? I think Dario absolutely had some really good games last year. I think he struggled early on in the season. However, especially in the bubble, we saw Dario attacking with a significant amount of aggressiveness, as well as he's a fantastic passer whenever he's attacking defenses. Whenever he's getting into that second level of the defense, he is fantastic at finding the open player. He's a great finisher, and he can knock down the three, which is really all you need out of a backup big man. He's obviously a bit undersized, especially whenever we run him in center position. There were a couple instances in which Zubac just went right up over him. However, he's still a solid enough defender. He gets a lot of contests, and against some of the shorter centers and power forwards of the league, he does a fantastic job at positioning himself well for good defense, again, especially in the post. So I love what Dario brings to this team. I think that he not only will be an element of the ball movement, I don't think he will not only capitalize upon the ball movement like a Mikal, Jay, and Cam Johnson, but I think he's somebody who generates ball movement, which is incredibly important, especially with that bench unit of Campaign and him. Campaign continues to move the ball at a high level, especially off of his penetrations. But that rest of the bench lineup really isn't exactly distributors, especially when you factor in Javon and Langston Galloway. So I do think that the offense that Dario Saric creates off the bench is incredibly important, and even pairs very well next to our starters. That being said, he finished well tonight. He knocked down 2 threes. I am so happy we are watching him instead of Damian Jones. It's night and day. Next would be Campaign. I think that Cam tonight, despite the fact that he had 7, 1, and 1 on 3 of 6 shooting, 1 of 2 from 3. I do think that he's one of those players whose offensive impacts are often underestimated by the box score. There were several instances where he drove deep into the lane and then had very nice kickouts, which either generated open looks in the corners or were hockey assists, where the ball is then moved from the corner to the top of the wing out on the three-point line for a good three-point look. I think that Campaign is somebody who generates offense at a high level, especially with his speed and control attacking the basket. I love to see him get deep into the lane with those little floaters, and he's a crafty finisher. So I definitely like what I am seeing out of Campaign. I like what I saw out of Campaign tonight. However, there definitely comes a point where if we're not knocking down our open three-point shots, We need Cam Johnson to be more aggressive off of the drive of campaign rather than sitting on the three-point line, moving in motion behind the penetration for the feed behind for a nice attack at the rim or a solid mid-range pull-up. And we didn't see much of that tonight, especially with CP3 off the floor. And I do think that negatively affected our offense, especially early in the second quarter, as well as moments in the third, although not necessarily as much in the third. Tonight, Langston Galloway and Javon Carter combined for a total of 7 minutes. I definitely think that we went very starter heavy in the second half. We played it much like we would play a playoff game, which I am all for. I think that it really, really showed what our starting unit, plus another 3 or 4 guys, Cam Johnson, and Dario Saric, is capable of. I think they're incapable of just the sky is the limit with those 8 players, and I think that's going to be incredibly important come playoff time. But again, Javon and Langston Galloway only getting 7 combined minutes tonight isn't necessarily great. I do want to see Langston get more minutes. I've said this the past few games. I would really like to see him get up into the 11-12 minutes per game range. However, obviously he came in, had a few bad three-point shot attempts, and we were already getting that from several others on the floor at the time. So I was okay with him being pulled. However, I would have liked to see him get some run with that starting unit. I think he's somebody who looks good with the second unit because of his ability to get his shot off at an extremely quick rate. However, I do think he would look even better next to CP3 or a D Book. So I definitely want to see Langston Galloway continue to get more of an opportunity. And then I understand why Javon didn't necessarily get the playing time. He's a guard stopper, and we didn't need a guard stopper really at any point tonight. I mentioned this last game, the Nuggets game, about how when Javon's not hitting his shots and we're not necessarily using him to slow down a guy like Jamal Murray, I would definitely be okay with them cutting back on his minutes. And tonight, they cut back on his minutes because we didn't need him. And I'm completely okay with that. I think Javon is an incredibly important piece to not only this year's Suns team, but was an incredibly important piece to the turnaround of the Suns last year that allowed us to be in this situation today. I have all of the love for Javon Carter, but it is incredibly important to realize that he's not necessarily the best ball handler, he's not a great distributor, and his shot is extremely streaky. So when we don't need him to be a ball hound, he can be a little bit redundant on the floor, and tonight he would have been redundant on the floor. However, against a team like the Hawks or even the Cavs, where they have young, very active guards, I expect Javon to get 15 to 18 minutes, and he'll absolutely deserve it because those teams will be fantastic matchups for a Javon Carter. So I've kind of gone through everything that I wanted to talk about. Most of the times I will review my game notes. However, I've already spent a nice almost hour talking about the individual things. And I think tonight was a little bit exhausting, especially if you're additionally an Arizona Cardinals fan. So I do think I am going to go ahead and hop off here in a few minutes rather than going through each of my individual notes throughout the quarter. I definitely do want to just bring up a few specific examples, which I normally do. One thing that I do want to talk about, a non-basketball question, what's in the bottle? This is Balvenie whiskey, which I picked up today. I have been sipping on it. I was sipping on it throughout the game. I'm sorry that it was, I guess, in the shot, but I really don't have anywhere else to put it on my desk right now. Definitely need to clean up my desk before I get into work. Need some of that for today. That's why I picked it up today, and I had started drinking it early on in the game, and then around that second quarter, I was like, "Fuck! I need to pour up a fat glass," and then I did. So I am definitely, not necessarily sober right now. McAllen, I absolutely love McAllen as a whiskey lover. McAllen, I'm a fan of Glenfiddich as well, but I especially recommend Oban Little Bay Scotch. It is fantastic. I absolutely love that shit. We definitely needed that after the Cardinals game in the first half of the Suns. Glenfiddich is a little peaty for me. I definitely understand that. Oban Little Bay is definitely the one to go if you feel that way about Glenfiddich. It definitely was a strong turnaround in the second half, and I do think there is obviously a lot to be optimistic about. I think what the second half showed us is what this offense could potentially look like, especially when D-Book is rolling. I think that we got glimpses of how fucking good we could be even without a McHale, a Cam, or a Jay just going crazy. Cam obviously played very solid in the second half, which contributed to the run that we made. But even when it's just Cam, CP3, Ayton, and D-Book creating, we look like an elite playoff team. So I think that it's incredibly important to come away with this game with at least some optimism. However, again, it's early in the season, and now we are officially exactly where we were last season. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. 5-2 is a fantastic thing. I would much rather be 5-2 than all but 2 combinations of 7 games. But at the end of the day, it is early in the season. We are getting takeaways from these games to project what we can expect. And I think that what we saw from the first half projected a extremely disappointing season. However, what we saw in the second half was incredibly optimistic. What we saw out of our starters tonight is reason to celebrate, not to demise. And I think that what we've seen out of our bench in the 6 other games shows us that even though the bench performance was not necessarily fantastic, there is cause to be optimistic going forward. When our starters play like this against an elite team like the Clippers, elite offense and elite defense, and we have seen what our bench can do against other teams, then there is absolutely reason to be optimistic. And I am not an Arizona Cardinals fan. I apologize to anybody who is, but this was not an all negative Arizona sports day. There are definitely a lot of positives to come away with.